All right, guys, welcome. Kind of a weird message there, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so first off, what I want to indicate to you guys is that the schedule, as a result of my absence last week, the schedule will have to be adjusted to reflect the date changes for the presentation. So as we see here, presentation 1 will now be on the 16th of November. So presentation 1 and 2, the 16th. Presentation 3 and 4, the 23rd. Presentation 5 and 6, the 30th of November. Then 7 and 8 will be on the 7th of December, and the last two presentations will be on the 14th of December. And of course, once we finish with the presentations, I'll open up the midterm reflections. So it'll probably open up from about the 15th of December for you all to start working on that. So you have a little more time to submit, to work on that and so on. In the meantime, in between, we will be getting together to prepare for a debate exercise on the 25th of January. So as we move through, we will start to get to that. My apologies for last week for having missed classes, but my mother had an accident and fell down and broke her arm, and I ended up in hospital, which is why that happened. Hi, Mr. Manswell, welcome. So I'm sorry about that, but it took a while to get her sorted out in the hospital and whatnot. It was a long process. Let's put it this way, and it's not finished yet. Okay, so we're moving on to chapter 3. Anybody has any questions or queries before I start going into the presentation? Concerns that they may have? No? All right. If nobody has any questions about the previous information, let's get going. So in chapter 3 here, what we're going to be looking at, and this is really where they're going to start detailing the model and all of its aspects in the welcome back, Valini. Hi, Valini, you hearing us?
Hi, sir. Yes, I'm hearing you now. Sorry, I was having some trouble with my computer just now, so I'm on my phone now.
Right. What's happening is when I turned on the recording, it told me that it was going to throw you out to the meeting, and you'd have to
Oh,
go back in. For some
oh.
reason, I think that was something that because of where you were coming from, something along those lines.
Probably I'm having some trouble with the Wi-Fi, so hopefully on my phone I might get through with it.
All right, okay. So I'm just about to start chapter 3, and the recordings are on, okay?
Okay, sir.
All right, guys. So as I said before, chapter 3 is going to start detailing. It's a pretty long chapter. I'm not going to be able to finish all of it tonight, but I expect that you guys can go through the rest of it. We'll get through the vast majority and see what we can get done tonight. All right. So basically, it's going to be, as I said before, it's going to present the full breakdown of the model that we're looking at for this program, and going to give you some things that you want to look at in terms of developing your own leadership philosophies and stuff like that. So it starts with the emphasis that leadership has to do with relationships and the type of relationships that we develop with each other is critical for the nature of leadership in this particular program. And this is something that permeates the entire discussion from the course, because the nature of our relationships is what really determines the quality of our communications and the quality of our interactions, and therefore the effectiveness of when we're trying to get things done. That is what's going to actually help us deal with issues that come up. This is a reminder of the definition that was utilized. It's of leadership is defined as the relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. So even the definition speaks highly to the relational aspect or the types of relationships we've developed. And of course, ethical really describes the nature of that relationship and the way in which we engage in relationships with each other in terms of it being ethical. Now, that's going to bring up a lot of discussion on that. So that there are five primary components that, first of all, the leadership model that's now called the RLM builds on a commitment towards purpose, positive purpose, that are inclusive. So that's the second element of people and diverse points of view. It empowers those who become involved. So empowerment or is going to be the third area. Those involved is ethical. So again, talk about the nature of the relationship. Is ethical. That's the fourth pillar, and recognizes that all four of these elements are accomplished by being process oriented. And that's the last element, the process oriented. So basically, it has to talk about a lot of doing and practicing and getting it right. Because a lot of times, part of the problem that we face is that we don't really get things right because we try to get it done in one go, and then that's not true. That doesn't work that way. All right, so this is just from the text as well, a figure that tries to give you a visual impression of what the RLM model is. So you'd see the whole thing surrounded by the process, and inside the process, you're talking about inclusivity, empowerment, purpose, and ethical values that are all focused on the purpose of the organization or the purpose of the the group that you're together with. All right. So the idea is to have a kind of physical look at what that looks like. Now, it doesn't try to describe current leadership practice, but is a model that we're supposed to utilize to help aspire towards something that's better. So it's a framework connecting five key elements that can serve as a responsive approach to leadership. Now, the reason why this book came up, as I said, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys, but the purpose that the college actually began to engage itself in this type of leadership training actually came up in the midst of questionable leadership that was taking place in the country during um, during the beginning of the Obama years. And we had some problems that were taking place in Trinidad um, during that particular period of time where leadership was kind of letting us down. I don't know if you all feel as if um, the leadership has improved since 2008 to now. This is because that's the time frame it came up. So the college looked at the current leadership and ethical value systems that existed outside there, and we, in fact, said, "Listen, we need to do something from a proactive point of view." And this model or this course came up as part of the college core, and it was one of the elements that we felt that we could do something to try and instruct people on a more moral, ethical approach to leadership as opposed to the leadership models that existed out there that were very um, object focused or goal focused um, rather than ethically focused. So this is the whole point of looking at the model like this. All right. So the first element, as we talked about, is purpose. The purpose of any organization will it is a vision driven and not positional driven. Now, hoping somebody's coming in. Um, who just hopped in there? I have to stop this though. All right. What do you all understand about vision driven as opposed to position driven? Anybody wants to give me what their take is on what vision driven as opposed to position driven is? No, you don't have to be right on, and it doesn't have to be wrong. What I'm trying to do is to engage you in some discussion. Christian, what do you think vision driven means?
Um, if it was position driven, I could give you the answer, but for vision driven,
So, what do you understand from the term vision?
well, I mean, how would I put that?
Anybody wants to
Um,
help him? Mr. Walcott, what do you think? I'm just calling names I remember now.
Well,
Believe me.
I am going with the perspective of one might be individual and the next one might be holistic for the organization.
Okay, say that again. I didn't quite make you.
One might be individual and the other might be holistically looking at the organization.
All right. Anybody else? So the vision is linked to purpose. All right. So the purpose of any organization is to create or do something. And their function and purpose is usually embedded in something called a vision statement or vision and mission statements. For those of you who have been in management places already, you'd realize that you spend a lot of time understanding the vision and mission of an organization because it gives it its purpose. So if you look at the college's vision and mission statements, those were vision and mission statements generated by the participants of the college at the time it was being created to be able to give it a purpose. What is its purpose and function? As opposed to that, it is not position driven, meaning that the what drives the organization is not the people in positions of power, but the vision that we're all trying to achieve is what drives the action. That makes better sense. So it's not person driven, it's driven by collective vision, sharing of that vision. That's what this is speaking to. Hopefully you all will get that. Individuals in the leadership process need to know themselves. We talked about this before, well before they can effectively work with others. And that's one of the reasons why the first presentations is understanding self. So you all are going to go into a little more detail about the process of getting to know yourself. The process calls for those engaged to be knowledgeable, that's the knowing element, to be aware and self of yourself and others, that's the being element. So that's chapters one and chapters, or presentation one and chapter presentation two, self-awareness and awareness of others, and then to act accordingly, to do what you believe, which is based on your knowledge and your practice. Okay, these components are related to each other. The knowledge you possess influences your way of thinking, which therefore influences your action. So that makes sense. So it's sort of like a truism across the board. All right. And therefore, the pattern of influence becomes circular because as you learn and you practice and you think about things, um, they change over time. And hopefully, what ends up happening is that you tend to spiral outwards in terms of perception and awareness. Now, some people spiral inwards and become really self focused and that kind of stuff. But the idea that we're looking at here is that you start to be more inclusive, more empowering to others, more knowledgeable about the thing, and therefore we're hoping for an outward spiral where you're spiraling outward and getting better every time you do certain things. Of course, the danger lies that you could start to go inward and become less flexible and so on. So that's part of the whole issue. That's why the knowing being doing element is a circular motion rather than a straight path. So one Palmer here describes it as head, heart, and practice. So that kind of makes sense. What's in your knowledge, what's in your heart, and that therefore the impacts upon how you go about practicing things and doing things. And therefore, he looked at this in the context of teaching, and he was able to what happens when we keep the head, knowing, and intellect separate from the heart, which is the being part, and even further separated from the practice. So I'm pretty certain that you all have had experiences with lecturers who are quite knowledgeable, but they're not enthusiastic about teaching. And then that starts to influence their practice and what they do, because really they don't care what happens. Have you all ever, unfortunately, experienced teachers like that in your lifetime?
Yes, sir.
And how does it feel to be in a class like that? How do you feel as a student? You just can't say yes, sir, and then keep quiet. You know? Well,
So I'm experiencing that this semester, actually.
so how is it making you feel?
It's kind of frustrating because I keep reaching out to the lecturer to get information to be added in a group for um
Don't
a
don't.
WhatsApp group as well. And it's just a lot of like the lecturer is not responding, they're giving short replies and it's just a lot. So yeah,
Yeah,
kind of
but all right. So you're describing there what is taking place. What I'm talking about is how does it make you feel as a participant in the class? Does it make you feel welcomed?
no, so and it's kinda discouraging because I don't want to fail the class.
Correct.
So yeah, it's kind of discouraging.
Right. So based upon how the leader behaves and their lack of commitment, their lack of heart, therefore, in the classroom, it seems to be having a negative impact on you. And what you find happening, if you were to study the development of that lecturer, you'd probably see that that behavior is something that happens all the time. And unfortunately, their practice does not benefit from it. So that's why Palmer was using teaching as one of them, because you can see it very quickly among teachers, those who are. So, as opposed to that, have you come across gifted teachers or teachers that you quite enjoyed working with? Let's look at a positive turn on that. Who work hard with you to make you included, and they reach out to you and try to make sure that you're okay and you're understanding the material.
You, sir?
Besides me, you now start to engage with me, so you can't use me. I'm talking about your own practice. From previous, I can't be the only teacher that does this. I can't be the exception. I have to be the rule.
So I think the lecturers that I've had like that, I would have probably done very well in their courses.
Right?
Better than my other courses.
And you know, it's a bad thing when the performance of a lecturer impacts so greatly on the success of a student. But that is the job of the teacher, is to help you walk through that information and help you understand the information. This is especially critical in your areas of critical program information. So peripheral courses like the one we're doing here, this is peripheral to your main studies, right? They are not meant to be as taxing as those that make up part of your program core. But the teachers that's supposed to be the strongest are the ones in your core, because those are the ones who are developing your specific disciplines. And that is one of the drawbacks that I tend to find happening. So like your practice, you also have to know what is the position of your course inside of a program. So that's something teachers are supposed to be doing. They're supposed to know, okay, this is not supposed to be a course that's supposed to stress students out. So um, sorry, if you're getting stressed out unnecessarily, then maybe you're not doing something right. Um, Similarly, if the course is more along the lines of your program core, then there's a degree of importance that's attached to the program because it's helping to develop very specific skills. So therefore, there's less lax behavior in that class, and there's more practice of getting things done. So the relative importance of courses tends to also be reflected by the behavior of teachers within those things. So it's important, therefore, that teachers get it right, because when they do get it right, they have better outcomes, which is at the end of the day, the vision that you have is what you're trying to focus on, and the vision is accomplished by the nature of the relationship you've developed with your lecturer. So if we move from the lecturer to your job places, if you have a boss who's more inclusive in his relationship and is passionate about the job that they're doing and the practice that they're getting into, then your performance in the organization is likely to be much better than with somebody who is just there because they're getting paid, kind of thing. And that's one of the problems of the teaching service. Um, because at the end of the day, it's providing jobs for individuals. Part of the problem that comes up with teaching is because a lot of people go into teaching just because it has holidays, which is technically not true, and the pay is relatively good. Well, and they're always complaining that it's not good enough, which I would say yes. But at the same time, the responsibility of teaching is quite big. So that's something that you want to be paying attention to as well. All right, so let's move from here. People will collaborate with others who are credible and those who are knowing. So, therefore, in order for people to want to work together with you in a ethical way, you as the individual who's leading off the exercise needs to demonstrate credibility and expertise in your area of the skill that you're looking at. So when you come to a classroom, the expectation is that the lecturer knows the content and you can believe the person when you're working with them. If there's no credibility, then you're not going to trust the individual understands what they're doing when they're working with you with the content. And the leaders have to demonstrate that to be able to that competence. They have to demonstrate that competence to the people. That so again, if you think about it from a teacher's perspective or from uh, um, uh, a supervisor or some manager, they have to demonstrate competence in terms of the job that they're doing. And of course, they have to maintain that by themselves going back to school and training and gathering more knowledge, especially as the knowledge changes and evolves over time. So think about an IT lecturer. If an IT lecturer doesn't remain competent and abreast of new developments, they could get left out. Would that not be the case, the IT guys in class?
So it actually depends on which part of IT you're talking about, because IT is such a broad thing. Like
Yeah.
for example, networking.
Uh-huh.
Networking don't change at all, so there's nothing like new to networking. Networking always stays the same. But every other aspect of IT, then yeah.
Right. But if there are changes to networking that come up.
Well, so far there's nothing since networking started, so
You're positive about that, right?
well, not 100% because networking is not my field, but according to the lecturers, then yeah.
Okay. But you understand, therefore, if you're dealing with the other areas, then
Yeah.
understanding and staying abreast of the latest developments and being knowledgeable about it. So, for example, one of my areas is economics. So I need to be staying abreast of what's happening from an economic standpoint. So I spend a lot of my time reading articles and staying abreast of what's happening in both academia as well as the real world out there, because need to be looking at, okay, so what's happening from an economic standpoint? Why might this be happening? Because students will have questions and they're going to ask those questions. And you, for yourself, for your own personal development, you need to be paying attention to that. So what happens when a teacher retires is that they retire, and you find when people retire, they don't actually just stop. They still keep on doing things in the field for a period of time, which is one of the reasons why a lot of retired people come back in as consultants, because they've arrived at a lot of accumulated a lot of knowledge, and they're able to help organizations or help institutions move forward with that information and help them to use the experience and practice that was developed to make things better for their other students and so on, and their practice. That makes sense? All right, so there are 4 levels of skills or essential to leadership. Interpersonal skills, that speaks to our ability to communicate that and deal with each other effectively. Conceptualization skills, the ability to think creatively, creatively think. Technical skills, which is the expertise and knowledge required for your position. So if you're a accounting manager, you need to have your expertise in that. And tactical skills such as negotiation, human relationships, and other types of skills that help them to give you an edge over other people when you're working with them. This is especially once you have to deal with other people, you're going to have to be tactical in nature. So strategic management and that type of stuff comes into those areas as well. So the process, as I said before, is an ongoing process. So you always have to keep on learning and growing. If you don't do that, then you're going to just get stale, and your skill levels and your effectiveness is going to fail after a while. The being element means knowing what the values and attributes define you as a leader. What is your character? What are those elements that you hold to be right, and how your belief structures is linked towards your action. And when that is questioned, what do you do in the light of it being questioned? So this is a kind of strange question here, because this has to bring together the concept of the being element and the ethical element together. So a lot of us have highly defined ethical values, and those ethical values impact upon how we behave. But the problem sometimes comes up is that given your employment circumstances, you might start to experience cognitive dissonance between what you've been asked to do in your work environment as opposed to what your belief structure is all about. Now, this is where things become very problematic, because if you constantly work in an environment where you're experiencing that level of discord in your brain, in your mind, and in your heart, you're not going to work well in that environment. Now, I'm hoping that people have understood this, because I want to ask anybody, have you been operating in circumstances where your personal belief structures are causing you problems, or they're conflicting with your workplace belief structures or belief practices? Nobody?
Well, so I was staying quiet for the multitude to say something, but like they wasn't saying nothing.
Well, go ahead. You make your contribution.
Well, actually, that's a what I'd say a prevalent thing in my work area, because you find there are people from just spiritual background. Some people come from a well-to-do home with good ethics and morals, and And when it comes to our work environment, you find it have a certain level of what are better with corruption,
Right?
right? And they find themselves in conflict with some of the elements.
Correct.
Right? You might be trying to follow the rule, the regulations, and then when you reach a certain rank or you deal with somebody, they dismiss it casually. So you stand up and want to know what's going on here. And it's
Right.
because somewhere along the line, unless somebody pull you and tell you in secret, hey, that man and that man is partner, that one and that one is partner, or stay away from that one. You would never know. So you could just be walking through the environment and in conflict with yourself and ask yourself, but why are you doing wrong? This time
Right.
that you ain't doing nothing wrong, Because of your moral standing in conflict with the behavior of other people in the environment.
Right. And that is something that causes a lot of emotional discomfort and intellectual discomfort for individuals operating in environments where they are in direct conflict with their personal belief structure and the belief and the practices and behaviors within the organization. Some people manage it by saying what is for work is for work and what is for home is for home. But that leads to a duplicitous type of behavior where in one environment you are behaving differently than another environment. And that is not the nature of what leadership is going to be about. Um, for those of you who might be a little older, you might remember the statement that politics had, somebody made a statement, not somebody, Basti Pandey made the statement at one point in time that politics has a morality of its own. That's not true. What is right is always right, and what is wrong is always wrong. And the context in which it's taking place, yes, it has an impact, but it shouldn't be your guiding principle. So your circumstances don't necessarily make one behavior right in one circumstance and correct and not correct in another. And that is something that happens. There is a that's one of the ethical dilemmas that we face in a society that supports capital punishment, for example. So in one light, um, what the law states is that if you create or commit certain types of crimes, you're supposed to be killed or punished or executed by the state. And the when you go to church, church tells you, or in most religions, they teach that killing is bad. Thou shalt not kill. So how do you reconcile a belief structure where you say thou shalt not kill, but you have to put somebody to death, or you have to be the person to pull a switch to kill somebody as I mean, that is the person who we're talking about is the executioner. But along the line, there are people that have to support that decision to execute somebody. So if you are having that kind of dilemma, how is it that our society therefore reconciles itself to that? Now, I'm not going to say that one is right or wrong, but I'm going to put to you that these are real conflicts that people face. Consider, for example, the debate about abortion. Should a woman have, and I saw another element to this, and so I'll ask this question to everybody here. So if a woman has the choice of being able to have an abortion if they don't think they're ready to have a child, does a man have the same right that if he's not ready to have a child, um, he doesn't have to be held responsible for it? Asking that question, I want to hear some responses.
Well, sir, according to society, it's a woman's body and his woman's choice. The man really ever saying that.
But is that if there's equity and equal treatment under the law, why is that therefore that double standard allowed?
Well, because the law is biased.
Correct? I wouldn't say no, but shouldn't we be revising the laws to be more equitable in this treatment of the population and people?
should be, but they're still gonna fight down the fact that it's the woman's body, the woman's choice. The man they really have a say in it. So
right? So you're with somebody and she gets pregnant. All right. She decides that she's gonna have an abortion. You have no say in the matter because it's her choice, correct? But what happens if you're okay with the abortion, but then she changes her mind and she says she's going to keep the child, but you didn't want the child, and now you are responsible for paying maintenance for that child, even though you're not married or anything. That whole concept of child father nonsense that comes up. All right. So now you are given a responsibility that you didn't want. How is that fair?
it's not, but that's just how it is.
So are you understanding? Therefore, if you have to operate in a situation like that, the kind of problems you might have reconciling your personal values to what's going on around, making sense? That's
Yes, sir.
like what Mr. Walcott was talking about. You're operating in a place where your values are directly contradicted by the behavior in the service that you're operating in, and you either toe the line because the organization will crush you if you don't, or you leave. Those are the choices. And that's the last part. Like, what part, what would you do if you wanted to do the right thing regardless of the circumstances or consequences? How many of us will stand up to organizations and do something about correcting the situation? Not a lot. I'll tell you that much. It's not a lot. Because at the end of the day, in some instances, you could lose your life doing things like that. All right. Consider, for example, all the people who may have stood up to Adolf Hitler when he first started his um his Judaism and well, the extermination of the Jews. Anybody who stood against him, they were removed because you didn't agree with what the ongoing principles that were being taught at that time was going on. What's happening now in terms of the vaccine and the unvaccinated? Therein lies a bit of an issue. Whether or not we have enough knowledge about the situation is a different issue. But what is right and what is wrong is critically different from as you move from person to person. There's some basic stuff, but this is where leadership becomes problematic. But this is speaking to the being of a quality leader. The doing part of it means that you act accordingly. So character and knowledge are not enough to facilitate change in doing attempts to produce the results and accomplishes the vision and creates the change and influences others to act. That's the doing part. So when you're actually working on your elements, the doing part is where you are exhibiting and producing the outcomes that you're trying to achieve and actually working on getting things done and influencing others to do the same as well. That part is the practice element. The other two elements, the knowing and being, are the elements that go before. Knowing yourself and moving in front and working from that position forward is going to be of importance from them. All right. Oh, come on.
So would you say how back in the day people would stand up against something for their beliefs, and nowadays you now have mob mentality where no
No,
one's allowed to really say
mob
anything?
mentality always existed. It's that in the past, there was the same issues that we face today. What we have today is that it becomes we see it much more than we saw it before. In the past, it was because little pockets of it was happening. We didn't know about it. Now,
Hmm.
with the advent of multimedia and mass media and the way social networks work at this point in time, you can see almost instantly when things are changing. So all that has changed from then to now is how quickly the information gets to us.
Okay.
Um, so, for example, in the late 1990s, I don't know if any of you all ever looked at Hotel Rwanda or something like that, where the Hutus and Tutsis were
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so
That
that's a
was
really
it,
depressing movie.
right.
That was a very depressing movie.
It was, but the fact of the matter is, was happening, and the it seemed at the time the rest of the world had no clue what was going on, and that had a lot to do with the fact that a lot of the news coming out of the area was being suppressed by the, I think it was the Hutus at that time, point in time. And as a result of that, they were able to basically exterminate or attempt to exterminate a whole tribe of individuals, or um, without any sort of backlash. And it was really, really horrible the way it went about, and how things ended up happening. And that, at the end of the day, the only difference between then and now is literally now everybody has a camera. Everybody could post onto the social media, and you can expose things far easier than in the past. Making sense? Both negative and positive things. So the past is no different to now. Now the only difference is really this is the speed at which we can get to the information. But the behavior, same thing. That mob mentality is something that has existed well into the past. In fact, now it becomes even more critical because now you have mob behavior um, that can be imitated or translated to international events. Everybody do the same thing all the time, and that happens. Look at how trends go on TikTok and all this kind of stuff. When something becomes trendy, what starts to happen? Anybody? Don't we all begin to copy it? No, I don't mean all
So,
in. I don't mean all
well,
in every individual, but you start to see everybody in every society beginning to do things from their own place that are similar to what they're seeing happening in other places. Yes? Not so? Yes?
Yes, sir.
yes, sir.
Uh-huh. And that's what we're talking about there. So, all right. So this is one element of the doing part that tends to fail with some people, is that sometimes leaders fail to act because they want everything to be right before they do it. And that is one of the things that causes a couple of negative things to happen. One, it stagnates the organization because the organization cannot do anything or spends all of its time fixing and preparing and preparing and preparing and never doing anything. And that fixation can stagnate an organization. And it also promotes this element here, zero defect mentality, and don't take any chances. And that's a bad standard to have, because if that's the behavior that you're going to go with, then you'll never try anything. If you don't make mistakes, you don't learn. But there's some organizations that say, no, 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 we're not making any mistakes. We get it right the first time. Consider every time when, and I'm coming back to an IT background here, when IT products are launched, or software is launched, doesn't it come up with problems, bugs and problems? And what ends up happening?
You had to do a patch and then send out a new
Correct.
update.
So it's not the end of the day if you don't get it to work immediately, because given the applications that are going to be utilized by those pieces of equipment and stuff, more than likely what's happening is that you can't anticipate the kind of problems that's going on out there, and therefore you'd have to write fixes for it. Now that works nicely with software, but when it comes to an organization putting out a product, so you put a product out and it's not quite working the way you want it to, then what you do, you either pull back the product and fix it, or you immediately begin to design the next product, which will deal with the issues and concerns and situations like that. There's never going to be perfection. Understand? That makes sense? It doesn't mean we can't aspire towards it, but at the same time, we can't let perfection prevent us from trying make to take chances, and that's a part of it. It stymies a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders in particular because of this zero defect mentality that they have. All right, learning as an outcome. All right, so learning, again, we speak about this all the time. Um, that the whole process of the knowing being doing sits upon this whole idea of constant learning or lifelong learning. It's something that we talk about in COSTAT all the time, that you're going to become lifelong learners. You're going to keep on learning and learning and learning until the very day that you die. You're going to learn the ultimate lesson of what happens after death. Now, some people believe they know, but of course, you'll never know for true until you die. What happens, right? It's interesting. All right. So the concept is really leaders promoting learning in the organization. So learn, learn, learn. That's basically what you're going to do. So there are three ways that a leader will do it: learning through their own learning, which is by example, by helping others to learn, and by shaping and contributing to a culture that promotes learning. So if your employers or your followers see you learning, going through the painstaking process, this is one of the reasons why sometimes a CEO of a company will join a training session with their employees and participate willingly in the activities and so on, because they want to illustrate by example um, how how we learn together. All right, helping others to learn would mean, making sure that you have a training budget, that kind of stuff, and you're giving access to people to get that training done. And of course, that then is always contributed. You put out a culture there. Hey, if you find something that is good, let me know, and maybe I could help buy or pay for part of the training for you and that kind of stuff. Your working environments like that, guys? Any of you?
No.
Sounds nice, right? Does it sound good to work in a situation or a circumstance like that?
Yeah.
All right, but you don't work in one, so well, I'm telling you that COSAT is one like that. We have that kind of thing there. All right, relational leadership is purposeful. So we're coming back now. Being purposeful means having a commitment to a goal or activity, as I talked about before, vision, and there's a group that's going to be dealing with vision and missions. It's the ability to collaborate and to find common ground with others to facilitate positive change. So we're kind of going back to the beginning here a little bit. Creating positive change means working hard towards resolving differences among participants and finding common direction, building a shared vision to improve the organization or enhance others. So they keep on talking about improving the organization or enhancing others, because again, the application of this leadership model is, of course, towards leadership, towards organizations like businesses, but it's also about service oriented businesses as well. One of the areas that that is growing a lot and requires a lot more leadership potential is nonprofit organizations. Are you all familiar with what I'm talking about? NPOs? Anybody here working for a nonprofit organization? It has to be both NPO and NGO, nonprofit and non-governmental. Thought I heard somebody going there. Any of you all participate in activities in non-profit organization?
I used to.
Which organization was that?
There's a new organization. A friend of mine that started up, but I don't
Uh-huh.
like the leadership there, so I skate.
You didn't like the leadership?
Yeah.
What was wrong with the leadership?
it was too one-sided. It's all about what them want, and it's not really so much about helping people. It's about helping exactly who them want to help and who really need help.
Okay. So without being specific, what was the context of the help they were talking about?
Okay, so the reason why I leave it, right, because it had some point in time a lady house or something that got burned down on Facebook, and it was circulating, right?
Right.
And we just had a fundraiser and we had extra money. And I bring up the idea like we help the lady
Uh,
and them go jump on board all the organization and fully registered yet. So they want to use the money to register the organization. And in my head I was like, what?
well, that kind of
Are
makes
we
sense because
yes
I'll tell
and
you
no?
why. The government is now requiring that non-profit organizations register, and if you don't register, you can get into trouble. So they kind of had to do it, but it costs money to register because you have to produce the accounts for the organization. You
Yes,
have to
sir.
put
But
through paperwork.
the next week we had another fundraiser. That's why in my head I was like, this not making sense.
Oh, I see. So you
Maybe
had
help the person and then the next fundraiser we register the organization.
well, again, I guess it was dependent upon the nature of the leadership and where what they saw was important. So I can understand um, your disenchantment with the organization. But both of those elements were important. The helping the individual, yes, but also making sure that legally your organization was put into the place it needed to be, and that's important because that's one of the elements that a lot of non-profit organizations suffer from. They suffer from poor leadership, um, primarily because in a lot of instances, there people who get involved sometimes they can't distinguish between their own personal belief structure and shared belief structures across the board. And that is problematic. It's something to be careful of. All right. But the first thing that you always have to do in an organization is build shared vision. So, what was the vision of that particular organization you were with?
So honestly, I can't remember.
Um, you see, and that doesn't bode well because it means you didn't share the vision, or else you would have remembered the vision. Um, Additionally, was the vision one that was it that one particular individual proved to be quite influential in the group? And did that leadership role move between individuals?
It was more like a dictatorship wherever the president said that was just that and nobody else questioned it except me and one other person that left as well.
All right.
That
And
was it.
was it that the leadership at that time was changeable, that different people could become?
Nope.
Sorry.
Strict.
No, it was fixed.
Yeah.
All right. So it wasn't a matter of leadership can change over time. All right. I can see where you can have problems with that. Sort of like a family structure. All right. Okay. Interesting example. It is important that all group members, and we could learn from this example that you just gave us, it's important that all group members be able to articulate the purpose or the vision of your organization and use it as a driving force because that's how you're going to be able to recruit more people. It is essential. Um, it's an essential element in that development leadership model. The conventional paradigm often asserts that positional leaders must have a clear vision. Research, however, has shown that two primary types of vision activities are needed: personalized vision and socialized vision. So that's really important. Personalized vision refers to your own personal vision of somebody within the organization that's giving off that or creating the vision for the organization or for the group that you're dealing with and sort of like trying to get it put in front of others for us to join together and say, hey, this is a good vision. But the more important element is the socialized vision. Because yes, you might have a good vision, but until that vision is not shared with others and others begin to support it, then nothing's going to happen. So the organization that you're looking at has to work on socializing the vision and firming it up. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people who are leading these little organizations outside there run into problems, because in order to prepare their documentation for the government, one of the things they're going to ask for is your vision and mission statement and your your various things. And if you just form the group just for so, with no particular goal in mind, then you're going to create an organization that will not survive because it's not capable of having a vision, or it wasn't constructed with having vision. And in doing so, then there's nothing to share with others to get them to get this vision to move forward. You understand what I'm saying? So it's critical that you're able to, even if you start with a personalized vision, to move it into socialized vision. Because if as a leader you can't share that vision and get other people to want to be part of that vision, then you're not going anywhere in terms of being able to build an organization and share that vision with other people. You're not going to be able to do anything without that. And that's why um, effective leaders don't just impose their vision on others, they recruit others to a shared vision, especially in our digital age when power tends to coalesce around ideas, not necessarily positions. Leadership is a partnership, not a sit show. All right. So basically, what you're saying here is that if you don't have a good idea and you're unable to, first of all, you have to have a good idea that others will be willing to jump on. And secondly, you have to be able to share that idea and socialize that idea with other people of a vision of how things should be in the future. If you're unable to do that, then you're not going to be able to be effective as a leader. All right. So remember, the vision and stuff is still part of the whole purpose of your organization. All right. So it goes on here to speak about how important vision is and what it does. And there's a group that's going to be dealing with vision and mission statements. So we could kind of go through this element a little, what its function is, to be motivating, to help other people to see what's going on. It's not what a vision is what a vision does. So that's another element too. Um, the vision is not the end all, but what the vision inspires other people to do is what is going to be the most critical element. Um, One common purpose that pulls people together towards working straight. So this is what positive change is going to be talking about. So that what we want to look at is the vision that we tend to have should really be positive in nature. So that's how you kind of get people to coalesce around what you're looking at. It supports positive. That's change that improves the human condition and that does not intentionally harm others. And that's important. It doesn't intentionally harm others. There have been organizations that have come up in the past that um, they have noble intent, but the way in which they got things done causes problems. An organization that comes to my mind who has noble intent but does things really weird is an organization called PETA, PETA. Anybody knows that organization? Prevention of Cruelty and Ethical Treatment of Animals. Don't know them? They have a tendency to be very they behave like terrorists sometimes. They go and bomb places and gun down things and all kind of stuff. It's really strange behavior, and sometimes what they is because they're so focused on protecting animals and preventing animal cruelty that they themselves um, behave in a manner that makes it difficult for people to want to work with them because they're so radical in their behavior. And that's one element that comes up with this too. So if you think about a terrorist organization, how is it that terrorist organizations can garner so much support? What do you think they're doing? Anybody? Now, of course, you remember it's positive change that we're looking at, right? But a terrorist organization is responding to a perceived threat to somebody's vision of the world. And it means that what they're doing is they are trying to engage in activities to bring about a vision of the world that is shared among that group of individuals that they believe is better for us all. So, an organization, let's say like the Taliban, for example, they exist because they believe, and they're very powerful. Um, they believe that the what's the word I want to use? They believe that their position on the way in which life's supposed to be lived according to Islamic law is the only way that people need to live. And they have a very strict code of behavior for everybody to act. And if you don't behave in that manner, then you are considered to be an infidel, and therefore you have to be removed from the situation. Why is it? Is it you think that they are inherently evil? Do you think that they are inherently evil, or they are responding and created a vision of something that they see as being right for them? Because they can't be sharing only evil things, right? How is it that we lost so many Trinidadians to the ISIS organization, who just willingly went across there and started to participate in that activity?
Because they don't have
Also,
support.
Go ahead, one at a time, please.
there's a question I'm going to ask you. How do you know that their doctrines or principles is actually evil?
Well,
Because
that,
what we look at or consider to be evil
correct, and that's my point.
might be good in their eyes.
That's
You
my point.
understand?
That's the point I'm trying to make. They're not selling a vision of something that is negative. They are selling something that is positive, but positive in line with how they are perceiving the world to be. And this is where trouble comes up. Somebody else wanted to say something. Or Mr. Walker, did you want to complete your point of view?
No, yeah, I think it was Jamal going to say something good.
No, but you brought up a good point. How do I
But
know?
but within the scope of it, okay, I like me. I try my best to interact with people from every different culture in the society,
Uh-huh.
be it Islamic, Hindus, everybody, and even gain an understanding and respect for what they believe in, right?
Right,
And I've dealt with people of the Islamic faith and of the Hindu faith,
right,
and when we had a discussion about Taliban and ISIS and this next one in Africa, whatever the name, can't remember the name of it right now,
right.
right? And these guys, they all have their own principle and doctrines of why they do what they do
Right,
and their own beliefs. Now, like say for instance, our local Jamaat al Muslimin, right? For deceased leader, Yasin Abubakar,
right.
they had their own principles and doctrines, right, as
But
to what they believe
their
the
doctrines
society
is
is
based
supposed to be
upon
doing.
one document, huh?
Yeah, and that's the next thing. People believe because they are of Islamic faith. What some people don't know in the Islamic faith, there are different sects
Correct,
in the Islamic faith. And so unless you understand that, you will look at all Muslims as being the same mindset,
correct.
which
Yes.
is inaccurate.
Hmm.
Right. And when I go back to organizations, I am a member of the Single Fathers Association as well.
Right.
And one of the reasons I left the association before was the failure of the organization to stick to the mandate,
Their
a
vision.
mandate and to organize um, the registration and the organization, constitution, vision. We did all of that. But then certain people in the organization, they didn't want to register the organization because they wanted to be lifetime leaders. Right? They didn't want to have elections and voting and all this kind of thing. So you find people started to drop out the organization. So again, that's a leader with a purpose. But is the purpose for who? Self or the group? Right? So that's earlier when I go to ask the question and all I wrote it down. Where does the individual abdicate the what do you call it? Hello?
Right. You lost me there for a minute. Sorry.
Yeah, I was saying where does the individual lose their right to self leadership or self government to say, well, yes or no, they agree? Because some leaders go down with their own values or their own mission and leave the group behind or leave the organization behind.
That's correct.
So that goes in line with everything you were saying about the leader and the the um, the rational leadership, right?
Relational
All of
leadership.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, everything goes in hand because I see it happen.
Yep.
Because okay, in my organization, we had a commissioner some years ago, John Roger. A lot of people said they didn't like his leadership, but when you look at what he did, he actually had a purpose. He actually had um, things he wanted to implement and get done. It
Right.
wasn't popular, right? But it was done. And at the end of his tenure, he could have looked back and said he accomplished X. But then somebody else coming after without a mandate or a mission or a vision or without any goal in mind and just sit on the chair and just become the spent up in mud. And what will happen when they leave, the next person taking over that portfolio, all they do spend the time doing is doing repairs to the
Yeah.
last person,
Yeah.
right? But I spoke to a guy in a motivational seminar once, and what he said to do in a situation like that, he said, "You go with what you plan to do," and he said, instead of going with the intention to fix, you go and continue to do what your vision is,
Yeah.
and as time pass, the issue will fix itself.
Yeah, well,
So that's me.
it's kind of self-correct, but it takes. Well, what happens though when you have leadership that comes in, and that has to do with the fact that somebody comes into a leadership position because um, they're they didn't have to earn the position; they just kind of got to the position because of seniority or just length of service, which is a dangerous thing because you could have a person come in there as a leader but have no real performance indicators. Or the worst thing is somebody ends up in a leadership, and that happened for a few years in the public service. They were getting ready to retire, and they had like a 2 years or 3 years to go, and they were put in as the commissioner for the organization in that leadership role, and really didn't want to bother with doing any major changes. They were just kind of there holding the status quo. And when that happens, then the organization kind of falls apart. Somebody else wanted to make a contribution initially, besides Mr. Walker. Coming back to the Taliban and ISIS and that kind of stuff. No? All right. Let's move on. All right. So you remember the model that we're looking at here, when we talk about its purpose, we're talking about positive purpose. Questionable there about nature of what is something that is positive. So the purpose has to be positive, or it should be something positive. Um, the intention, therefore, is always going to be that you're going to improve something, accomplish a task to help those. So, like in terms of the gentleman who got disenfranchised from his own organization because of the behavior that was going on. Um, he felt disconnected between the two elements that was going on, and one of the problems with non-profit organizations is the issue of managing money and being accountable. And it's one of the reasons why government has decided to become more hands-on in that process, and that's an important thing you want to pay attention to. Now, when you're working towards making change, change is always a difficult element, and there is always going to be the last presentation is managing change, and you're going to be looking at this more important in more detail. But when you're talking about organizational vision and mission, it usually speaks to some kind of change that has to take place within an organization or within some sort of business structure. And the problem is, how do we begin to change? It means that even from a personal event, you'd require something to what they call here unfreeze, and then change, make the change, and then refreeze. So that's what we call the the, the traditional approach to things. Unfreezing is caused by a trigger event. Now, consider things that may have happened in your life that has caused you to want to make some kind of change in your life. And it's usually going to be some kind of negative event that causes you, or it could be a positive event too, to cause you to make some changes in your life. Positive events like we might be getting married, having children, acquiring a house, or acquiring some sort of asset. Those kind of trigger events can cause you to say, okay, now I want to make this change and that kind of stuff. But the vast majority of us make changes based upon something happening, and therefore we have to respond to it. The same thing happens with organizations. That unfreezing in an organization usually, however, tends to be triggered by some catastrophic behavior. So consider, for example, the movement of Costa into a fully online institution, or well, generally a fully online. It was triggered by the pandemic, and that caused us. Now we were slowly transitioning our programs into the online environment, but there was no haste in doing it. The idea was that eventually we'd be able to, within a couple of years, begin to offer an entire part of a program online and so on to be able to reach students who couldn't make it to class. But brought on by the concept of what took place with the pandemic, we had no choice but to make that change. Like you're seeing that thing. Do you think at the end of the day, just as a matter of interest to me, that it was a positive change as opposed to a negative change? Do you think the online environmental shift is one that is positive to you?
It has both positive and negatives, to be honest.
All right. Yeah, but as with anything. Anybody else? All right. So other unfreezing elements could be changes in policies, new laws. So that's one actually for non-profit organizations. New laws were enacted where you have to register. You couldn't, especially if you were receiving government funds or soliciting public funds, you had to have your paperwork in place. So obviously, when you unfreeze the organization, you start making the change, then you have to have something guiding you through that change process. And that change process is actually dealt with through change management. That's something that, as I said, will be dealt with in more detail. But one of the changes that they talked about here, or the the processes that they look at, is that when you make a change in the organization or within any sort of thing, rather than refreeze the situation, they are best saying that you should keep it kind of slushy, so that if you look at slush, once it doesn't melt, it stays relatively in the shape that it's in. If any of you eaten a slush, but it's relatively easy to move, and that's what they're considering. Consider when you make that kind of change, because it was generally going to be very, very difficult to make the change in the first place. So don't refreeze your organization into a new structure, but rather create a structure that's kind of slushable so that it can react to changes as things change. That's something that you could look at. So rather that you should be looking at reviewing constantly and evaluating and trying to keep a flexible organizational structure or flexible organization rather than something that tends to get big. All right. So this is the Lewin model describing the change process of moving from the present state through a transitional state to the desired state. But they're encouraging the desired state should be considered to be less rigid. That's what we're talking about. That's slush. So you want your change to be slushy, so to speak. Of course, making change is time consuming. It takes a long time to get organizations to make changes. If you think about it from a personal point of view, when you're making personal improvements or changes in your life, it takes time to make those changes. And you hope that those changes, lead you into some sort of positive type of thing. But those changes take time. And because they're time consuming, it can really exhaust people in organizations when that's taking place, as it can with a lot of people. Um, it's not that when you're making change, everybody's going to come quietly. A lot of people in organizations hate change. Think about yourself when you have to make changes to anything in your life. The kind of complaints get these get from students all the time. uh, so again, we just continue the whole kind of evolution of the change over time, that kind of stuff. Again, it's about making change and creating an environment where change is going to be a much easier process in the future than the first time that you have to make that change. Being inclusive means understanding. So this is the other element we talked about, the other pillar, being inclusive means understanding, valuing, and actively engaging diversity in views, approaches, styles, and aspects of individuality, such as sex or culture, that add multiple perspectives to a group or team. So this is when we talk about inclusivity in the relational leadership model. This is what they're referring to. Being inclusive means this. Now, this is a difficult one to do, especially if you're in an organizational that tends to be monolithic in nature. Well, what do I mean? They tend to come from a very people who work in certain organizations tend to come from a very similar background. I don't know if you've ever really recognized that um, with certain types of organizations, especially if the organization is filtered through geographics. So, for example, if you're ever part of a youth group, the youth group will be only the youths in that one area that you live in. So that therefore you're gonna find that everybody seems to be quite similar to each other. Now they're not gonna look similar, but they behave and believe in very similar things. And therefore, when you start to deal with international influences or more national organizations, let's say like the police force or the regiment or whatever organization that has to be more regional in nature, then you're going to start engaging in a lot of diversity. Now, it's easy to always say that we're diverse because we have this hodgepodge of individuals living in Trinidad, but of different ethnic backgrounds or racial backgrounds. But if you think about it, what we really have here is a set of individuals with a very common set of experiences. So, what we may view as being diversity is not necessarily going to meet this kind of standard because, all right, so how many of you all work with foreigners? Any of you all? People from other countries? Have you ever had opportunities to work with people from other countries? right? How about any of you all have people in your organizations who live alternative lifestyles?
Yep.
Sorry,
Yes, sir.
right? And being inclusive means, remember what I said here, understanding, valuing, and actively engaging with them. All right. That's a difficult thing to do if you are having problems with their lifestyle. So, not saying you have to agree with their lifestyle, but you have to understand it. And once you understand it, you'd have to value it. So let's understand what we're talking about here. So you have a gentleman that you're working with who is gay. All right, let's use that frame, and he has a relationship problem with the other gentleman. All right, let's say there's some sort of problem with the with their relationship. Now, can he or she, because let's say it's a female thing as well, can they expect the support of the organization if there's trouble with their relationship?
Well, so in my case,
I don't think so.
the individual, um, he kept his affairs to himself.
Right. And there was a reason why.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why he kept his affairs to himself was because the organization does not understand, they don't engage in it, and therefore they don't value it. That's what we're talking about. And that's within the national security services. But there are other organizations that behave that, especially faith-based organizations. If you belong in a faith-based organization, treating with somebody who has a different approach to living life is going to be problematic. That's why I say a lot of organizations tend to be monolithic in nature, in that they tend to be very similar individuals that work in that environment. Because despite the obvious diversity in terms of their faces, their races, and that kind of stuff, they all tend to be the same mindset. So we have to be really more um, broaden our thinking when we're talking about inclusiveness. If you ever get an opportunity to work with individuals outside of Trinidad and Tobago, you'd start to understand what I'm talking about. Um, because when we started working with people with really serious differences in their belief structures and that kind of stuff, you might find that it might be more problematic. And that's one of the biggest struggles that we have to pay attention to as leaders or being in groups with organizations, is how the group treats with individuals from who are different. It's not really how they go about treating. Well, it's important how they treat everybody, but their attitudes towards people who are different is going to be more telling of the situation. And we have to understand that those groups or those individuals, because of the difference in their background, can bring lots of valuable information to us. Because the way in which they would view things in our society or in our actions or behaviors or what we have to do will be very different to the way we might perceive them, because we have been looking at them in one particular manner all the time. So that's one of the strengths you have to look for, that looking at something from that perspective is always going to be different, and be willing to listen to them, not just hear them, but really listen. That's an important element that we have to pay attention to. All right. So inclusivity is going to be one of those elements that you have to be talking about with developing your leadership skills and in trying to be dealing with the whole thing. That's why it's such a critical element. Right? Inclusiveness breeds new leadership and creates a positive cycle. That's it. Because if you are inclusive, it gives other people opportunities who may think with other differently to you, but it gives them opportunities to be able. So again, This then leads us into the empowerment element. Huh? So purpose, vision, and values of the whole come to life as individual members describes and applies them. So only when you're inclusive and you have that socialized vision do you get people to be able to share and then develop their ideas together with each other. And that's going to be really important. Being inclusive means developing the strengths and talents of group members so that they can contribute to the group's goals. So one of the things that what I want you all to translate some of this inclusivity to is to the behavior of your groups, especially when you're getting into larger group activities in COSTAT, because that's something that happens all the time. You have to be more open to everybody and listen to them and try and identify or help them identify what they're good at, and you know give responsibility and give them control over those areas, so that way you get the very best out of everybody participating in your group activities. And that's something that organizations have to be really good at, understanding that getting to know their people and how they are able to work within the organization is going to be an important element that you have to look at. All right. In addition to its practice, the language of inclusivity is something that is very important. Um, so we have to think about the word we as opposed to the word I, and that's something that a lot of of leaders have to really learn to do. Especially junior leaders, they have a tendency to really think a lot. I want to do this, and I'd like to see this happen, and so on and so on. When they really have to meaningfully use we, you just can't throw the we in there. You actually have to mean the we, which means you have to work to get the we. So you have to get people engaged and really feel as if when, as a leader, you say we, it really means we are going to be doing this. Making sense? That's why when we talk about the class, I would always refer to the class as that we are going to explore these concepts and try to get a handle on what the relational leadership model is all about, and try to see how much it will influence our personal behavior. So it's we influencing us, our individual. So the meaning of the word and the use of the word is going to be important. Not saying that you can't use I, but you can't be using it excessively. I don't know if any of you all ever got that advice when you're writing letters of application. Try and don't use the word I too much.
I can't say I ever heard of that.
You never heard that?
I can't say I have.
Okay. You ever did letter writing techniques for job applications?
Probably but a while back, and I don't really recall ever them mention anything about I.
Yeah. What you try to do is you try to limit the use of the word I this. I this and I that and I next. And you try to use more general or generic statements that, because yes, you're speaking to yourself or about yourself, but you don't want to come across as being too cocky. So there has to be a balance in what you're doing. All right. That's the whole thing. You want to feel engaged, but you don't want to feel enraged. Because some people can kind of rub you the wrong way across the board. All right. Of course, as I said before, groups will work better if we start to have this more inclusive behavior taking place. Building consensus. Everybody understands what consensus is. What does consensus mean? Nobody? Is it that none of you all have ever developed consensus in a group project?
Yes, like a general agreement.
Right? Does it mean that everybody's in absolute agreement?
No.
No
But what is,
majority.
well, no, not necessarily. It goes beyond that. Does it mean that if you are one who's opposed to the particular direction, that you leave the group? Or that you still do that, you're still in the group, but you do it the way the group is asking you to? That's what
Yeah, I assume
consensus is.
so. No, isn't that what it is? If the general consensus is that you do it this way, well then you have to, no?
Well, yeah, you accept the group's decision over your individual position. That's
Yeah.
an important element. Yes, that's what a type of consensus is. But arriving at consensus means that you have to engage in inclusive behavior, which means you still have to listen to what other people have to say, regardless of the fact, and come to a higher decision based upon each individual person's input into the situation. That make better sense now? Yes?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. All right. Um, being inclusive also means identifying shareholders and stakeholders external to your organization. So, for example, with your group that was doing the charitable work, you had to take into consideration also the shareholders, which were the people who were contributing to your fundraising activities, and the stakeholders, the people who were benefiting from your activities. You have to make sure you consider them as part of the people who have to be inclusive in how you develop your ideas and concepts. All right. And you need to be inclusive to those people as well. How best to help people. Um, a lot of people don't like to receive help in a very public manner, especially families that are in dire need. Why is that? Why would a family not publicize that they're having problems?
I guess they wouldn't want pity.
Sorry?
They wouldn't want people's pity them.
Yes, because there's an element of embarrassment attached to a family that has people who are working and trying to make ends meet. There's a form of embarrassment that is felt by that household, that they're dependent upon the goodwill of other people to get them through a hump in their lives. And that is a very important element that organizations have to be aware of, that you can't just utilize these events as a way to publicize what you're doing. You have to be very careful of how the people who are receiving the funds, the money, or whatever that you're doing, the activities that you're doing, how they are feeling about it, and how it looks in their community. Because I mean, it can be quite embarrassing for a family to be, looked at as, they're getting all this charity from people. You know how we are quick to judge people. So it's something that you have to be looking at as well, and that has to do with your stakeholders. So I'll tell you, for example, whenever we are making any kind of change in Costa, we always have stakeholder meetings and shareholder meetings. So shareholder meetings will be what we call our PACs, which is our program advisory committees, where we are looking at including the businesses and organizations that employ our graduates, and the stakeholders will be guys like the students themselves, who you guys have a stake in what we do, and therefore we'll call those individuals together to get an idea of how they feel through focus groups, questionnaires, that kind of stuff. We try to gather data from you all. Important thing for you all to do when we send out those things, or at the end of the semester, you do your reviews. Your How many of you all do those reviews that they send out to you to evaluate your classes?
I have never done any.
Why? How we
Um,
get to know which lecturer is doing what, which courses are doing what, if we don't get those things sorted out or explained?
I think
I
I'll
used
start
to
to do
do
it.
too.
That's the function. We don't ever know who does what, who scores where, what. Is it totally anonymous? But it means that we can get a report that says
So,
the general feeling in the class is X, Y, Z. It gives us scores. It gives us some statistical data by looking at average ranking and that kind of stuff. It shows where we scored well, where we didn't score well, and it gives us information to feed into change, to make our own change. So that makes sense. All right. All right. So talking
So
about,
I feel like Wally was getting feedback on that.
sorry.
At that point in time, I used to tell myself the lecturers knew who the students were saying what.
Nah, never. You could never tell who's doing what.
I used to get some. I used to get some treatment. I swear, all you know going on there.
um, it's one of the things you have to look at when you see behavior like that coming to you is you have to look at what signals you're sending out. That's the first thing you have to pay attention to, because those signals may be what people are responding to. A lot of times, people have a feeling. I mean, I've gone through this as well. You know, it feels almost like somebody have it in for me kind of thing. And when I already check myself and I say, okay, I was behaving kind of erratic, or um, my behavior brought on that reaction, because it's kind of normal for that to happen sometimes. All right. Okay. So again, being inclusive to those who are outside of the group, stakeholders, shareholders, we talked about that. Making sure that we are looking at what they value, what's important for them, and trying to make sure that we take into consideration their view and vision of things to be able to make our organization work better to those individuals. This is especially important when those stakeholders and shareholders are going to be critical to the survival of the organization. Is really going to be important for that element. So when you're dealing with them, what you're looking for is to get people into this area of being supportive, which is high perception of high support and um, importance, high importance. So you want supportive people. You really don't want to have high levels of opposition and with low levels of importance. That's problematic people or individuals. All right. So you want really to have this. So this is a nice diagram that is giving you a matrix of where people can fall into what categories. Um, so perspective or stand on issue and degree of importance to the stakeholder. So you'd have to see where they fall on that kind. Because for some stakeholders, some things are not important to them, but it's critical to us. All right. So, if you understand what I mean. So there are things in an organization that is really important to the persons in the organization, but the um, to the to the to the stakeholder or the shareholder, it is of no importance. And this is something I can tell you all about. This is if you ever play in a band, what is of critical importance to us as band members or performers is the sound system and and the sound engineer, and whether or not they're able to reproduce the sound that you want to get the very best out of it. That is of critical importance to the performer, but it's of low priority. Nobody really care who the engineer is. When they go to a show, they just want to know that it work and only perform and we enjoy ourselves. Isn't that correct, guys? When they go to a fete or a party or DJ, uh, so it doesn't have to be a band, but any kind of performance where music is. Would you agree with that? You just know when it don't work, but you just know when it's working. Would you guys agree with that? No? No comments. All right,
Yes, sir.
empowerment.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's always good. All right, so relational leadership is empowerment. So empowerment is a critical element as well as the other principle that we talked about of the five principles. So that what the most important thing that's coming out of this whole area of empowerment is that you have to create a situation or circumstances in which you as the leader empower other people in the organization to begin to take their own leadership roles in the organization. Be it that they just claim little ownership of little pieces or places in the organization, processes as they talk about here, claim ownership of places in the organization in the process and expects to be involved. So it has that's one element. The second element, conditions that promote full involvement by participants by reducing the barriers that block the development of individual talent and involvement. So the idea is you're giving people the expectation that they are to take charge, and you're giving them the resources and conditions to take charge. You can't only give them one. You don't just give them. You don't just tell individuals, "Hey, you have to take charge of this process and own it," but then you withhold the the resources necessary to get it done. That is going to fall down flat on its face fast. So you don't only give over power, you also give over resources to it to act on it, to facilitate it. All right. So empowerment is claimed that I have a legitimate right to be here and say what I feel and think, as well as share with others. You should be involved in this. You have a right to be here as well. Tell us what you think and feel. Being empowered means mitigating aspects of the environmental climate that can block meaningful involvement of others. And that's something that happens in organizations. You get a lot of people who, when you go to a meeting, they sit in the back of the room. Students do this as well in classes. They don't necessarily have to sit in the back of the room, but they sit in the class and they just kind of withdraw from the class, and they're just there. They barely get involved with group activities. They tend to be non-communicative. So there's no sense of involvement, no empowerment that's taking place. So you as a leader need to look out for those kind of things to be able to make sure that you're bringing as many people into feeling empowered in the organization. Because if you don't empower them and create this sense, you're not going to be able to achieve those goals that you're looking for. And that's critical. That's something that you want to be doing. So that you have to create the environment to be able to get people to do that. And that's what this element is going to be speaking about. And in order to do this, we need to understand that empowering means that you are dealing with power. And therefore, we have to understand a little bit about power and power dynamics, which another group is going to be dealing with this in a lot more detail. That's the group that's doing power and influence. All right. So that positional leaders must be willing to share their power or authority. That's an important element, power sharing. That's not something that a lot of people like to do. Power sharing is something that if it's the power of my position gives me this power, then I'm not giving anybody else any part of that power to act. Because the other element is with power comes responsibility. So that if you're giving the power over, then they have to also give over the responsibility. So although you're empowering other people to do things, you also have to make them understand that if I'm giving this power over to you, you become responsible for the outcomes necessary for the group. So giving power does not come just by itself. Power has responsibility. That's something that is true. Spider-Man's dad had it right. With great power comes great responsibility. All right. So the concept of zero-sum basis for powers is a traditional view. It's all or none. I either have all the power and you have none, and that's how it's be, or that power is something that can be shared. So we want to move to that kind of. We can move to that area of sharing power. So different types of power exist concurrently among people in any kind of relationship. So power dynamics range from power over, that's autocratic, that's sort of like your parents and teachers, they have power over you. Power with collaboration, so we have with other members of the group, we have power over certain things. And power alongside would be like collegial approaches. So I know my colleagues and I have other lecturers have a lot of influence over the course content, but we have mandates to meet that come from above, all right? And then when I work with smaller groupings of individuals to get work done, we have that collaboration. So if you could think about this from the perspective of a classroom, you can see the teacher has the autocratic power, that's the power over. You guys collectively have power together. And then alongside each other, those of you who are probably coming um, from similar um, program backgrounds, you all have collegial power because you all are currently working together side by side in relation to that. So to kind of give you a kind of idea of what that's all about. All right, so you get power from referring to authority and power for to leaders in a group. So what we're going to look at here is the sources of power. So there are three bases of power. Expert power, I should say three, there are five actually. Expert power, reverent power, legitimate power, coercive power, and reward power. So these are the sources of how people in organizations or in life end up with power over us. All right, and there's some of them that we give to people and others that people actually have on their own. So expert power, this is one that is earned by the individual because the individuals are expert on something. Here we could think about an IT expert who knows how computers work, why they do what they do, and how they can fix it. So their expertise gives them a source of power over you, as if you have no clue on what's going on. That makes sense? So that's why we trust experts and give them power over us based on their assumption. How many people, IT experts, have you given your passwords to fix things? Your phones and tablets and that kind of stuff. Consider that, that's expert power. And sometimes you don't know these people from Adam. Reverent power, let's deal with that one. Refers to the nature of strength of the individual that you're dealing with. These are individuals in organizations or in society who are looked upon as being wise, not necessarily because of the length of time, though time has some part to do with it, but they carry a kind of worldliness about them that we refer to them as, sort of like a guru, a leader. They have or they don't necessarily need to have positional power. It means that they have no rank in the organization. But because people look upon them as being, knowledgeable about things or a combination of knowledge and experience and so on, then they would have a tendency to say, this person know what they're talking about, and they get that kind of reverent power. So experts tend to experience this reverent power as well too. Reverent means, you be reverent to them. Legitimate power, this is due to your position that your role is really has to do with that. The formal role that the person, so if you're the head of the department, your manager, supervisor, those positional titles give you a particular responsibility and give you authority. It's not good to only have that form of power. You should be able to develop legitimate power and other sources of power as well as a leader. So then you have coercive power. This is one as dangerous. It can be it can backfire because coercive power means that you have power over the imposition of punishment. So you could punish people or you could remove benefits that people get. Sort of like that's like a teacher who's beaten people in class. Well, they don't do that anymore, do they? That has been banned. Problem with it is that coercive power is problematic because of its negative impact. And similarly, reward power is similar to that. It influences behavior through the ability to deliver. So it's sort of like the reverse side of coercive. So they're kind of the same coin. Because if you don't give the reward, it can be seen as being coercive to the individual. So rewards might be extrinsic, like raises, plaques, or special privileges, or it may be intrinsic, like praise and support and recognition. Those are kind of sources. So we understand all five sources of power. The idea is you may use some of your power if you're aware of them. Um, and conversely, other people might give you power without you even knowing that you have that power. So from the time you hear students in classes are IT student, you start to give them something in your mind. Power is a strange thing. It doesn't just arrive like that. We have to actually give that power over. So you might look at who the IT guys in class here. The one who was telling me that networking doesn't change.
So that is me
Right. So who's that? I need a name.
and Jamal.
So Jamal might be, we might, because he sounds as if he knows what he's talking about, then we might unintentionally attribute to him power that he may not actually have. You understand? But because we make assumptions about the individual, we say, yeah man, he's an IT expert, he gonna know what to do, kind of things like that. You follow? So some power we just ascribe to people because they we have an expectation that that they get. It's sort of like what is here. Others may attribute some source of power to you without you knowing what is happening. As for example, when somebody fears your disapproval because you have reverent power. So you get that kind of power because somebody values your opinion about them. So you don't want them to get buff. Making sense? All right. So understanding power here, what they're talking about is sometimes we give our power away, or we don't um, we don't trust our own power that we have. Um, think about it from the perspective of when we don't trust ourselves enough to have the confidence to speak up about something, because somebody else is supposed to be an expert. But there have been instances where experts have been wrong. You know that. When the person with legitimate power announces a plan or approach, we give power away if we do not say, let's talk about that first. So that's put somebody who has been given the post of leader, and they come and say, this is what we're doing. And you give away a power by just staying quiet and accepting that that is what we're going to do. Whereas, can we discuss this, or let's talk about this first before we go ahead? Because we give, so that's why when you're having a meeting, um, people who understand the use of power understand that when they put these ideas forward, they expect discussion, which is why when I put things into class, I don't have all the power in class, but you give me all the power because you don't challenge me, you don't ask questions, which would therefore make me have to elucidate on the information or the idea. And that is something that, as students, we have to understand how to do it without, pissing off your lecturers by by understanding how to challenge sources, the powers that exist in a classroom or in any circumstances by being respectful of that power as well. All right, and understanding it. Now, you may not respect the individual, but you have to respect the position. There's another issue that comes up with that as well that we have to pay attention to. All right. Um, we may also have power given to us that is undeserved. So when people make assumptions about your capacity based upon, so in this instance here, they're talking about an English major who's writing. The same thing can be said about the IT example I was using before, because Jamal might be absolute crap when it comes to computers, but because he's studying IT, we gave him that power, but he could be absolutely wrong. Right, Jamal?
I
Not
cannot
that,
confirm or deny that statement.
not that I would say, but we could be giving you power based upon what we think what we expect of you, but not knowing you. That makes sense? From
Yes,
that
yes, it
in that
does.
context. All right. And that's true. Sometimes we expect that, yeah, man, he can handle that. And the truth of the matter is that you haven't developed that level of skill yet. But we've made that assumption. And that is something that we can do, or we tend to do sometimes. And that is a problem that comes up. Again, power is not infinite, and therefore power can be shared. Conventional leadership sees sharing power as indecisiveness and an avoidance of your responsibility, and that is not true. Um, the reality is that power can be shared, but when you're sharing power, you must also share the responsibility. So when you're giving somebody power to somebody else to do something, you have to also let that individual know that the responsibility of the use of that power goes with them. That if they don't do what they're supposed to do, the time frame that they're doing, then it's going to affect the entire organization or the entire group of individuals in a particular manner, and therefore they must take responsibility for that. So, um, legitimate power is the one that is very difficult to share, although it can be done, but it's very difficult to share because contractually, if you are the manager, then contractually you're given the responsibility. But part of the responsibility of any leader is to delegate. And when they delegate, they can call upon other people to do. But delegation has its own problems associated with it. All right. And the reason why you have to give up that power is because you can't do everything. Because to get things done, you have to get other people to be looking at it. All right. So this goes on to go on more about the impact of power and accountability and hoarding power and holding on to it. Um, when you're hoarding power, it tends to be create some negative things. Everybody um, would react to that power hoarding differently. Generally, the reaction tends to be negative. Um, so you see things like sabotage as alternate, um, doing things against you, withdrawal, and these are dangerous when they're passive aggressive things. Withdrawal from participating actively in things, resistance. This is anger and other behaviors that will contradict the positive goals of the object. So you have people who will do what they can to prevent you from getting to your goals, actually going to sabotage or withdraw an effort from it, or being angry about things all the time. Those are things that can happen all the time as well. Self empowerment. So self empowerment is another element here that you also have to be able to reach out and grab and empower yourself, understanding that you have value to contribute. So that self empowerment is one that has to be encouraged as well by a leader. Um, it means that you as a leader must encourage other people to want to self empower. So that is kind of a double-edged sword. You have to provide opportunities for people to want to do this, as well as things that you want to do. And they give you some advice here of 6 methods to empower other people: education, sharing information, inspiring leading, so directing, creating structures, 3 structures, bringing people to the table, changing your policies, processes, open door policies, things like that. Having people get together and work on problems, that's another thing. Making sure that other people have the resources to get their job done. Mentoring, which is again developing relationships with people to be able to, to, to give them opportunities to empower themselves. And then, of course, actualizing, taking on, being empowered and claiming it. So you have to envision or behave in a manner that will do the same thing, will encourage others to do it. Valuing the empowerment of all members creates a larger group of participants who generally take more ownership of the tasks and processes and feel committed to the outcomes of change. So the more empowerment that takes place, the more powerful your organization of individuals become. Some people don't like that. Other people would value this because the organization becomes capable and more resilient to get a lot of things done when they have the deal with it. Mattering and marginality. So this is something that happens when we're dealing with people. People either feel that they matter or they feel marginalized, and that's important. Um, Mattering is a motive. The feeling others depend on us, are interested in us, are concerned with our fate, which exercises a powerful influence on our actions. So if you feel that you matter, then you're going to react and behave in a different manner than if you don't feel as if people care about you. If you feel as if people care about you, then you're going to behave in a particular way. It's just human behavior that we're talking about here. But it's critical for leaders to understand that followers need to feel as if they matter. If they feel as if they don't matter, they're not going to respond in the manner that you're looking for. All right? In new situations or in new roles, people tend to feel marginal or marginalized. And when you feel marginalized, you tend to hold back and you things don't matter to you much. So you have to create a situation where not only as the leader but other people in the organization help to bring people in from the margins, and bring them into the main area so that they feel as if people care about them in the organization, and they then can feel that they can actually do things. Um, in contrast, mattering is so feeling marginal, as if we do not matter unless the group welcomes us and seek our meaningful involvement, as opposed to that whole situation of feeling as if we are important in the process. All right. And it's one of the things that tends to happen too with marginalization. Um, it's also not only new members that get marginalized, but anybody who appears to be slightly different in an organizational structure, different, diverse, those kind of things, they have a tendency to be marginalized easily within organizations. And that is something that we, both as leaders and as followers, we have to pay a lot of attention that we are not contributing to the marginalization of people within your own organization. Think about it in your family, um, where you might have a child or a member of your family who is, difficult to deal with, and you tend to ignore them and leave them alone. That's marginalization. And they start to feel as if what they do don't matter. That can have disastrous consequences to individuals in families, especially if they start to feel marginalized, because then there's no place that they can go and feel accepted, and that is problematic. This is especially when members of our families are behaving in manners that we don't like, participating in activities they don't like. We tend to, push them to that side, and that marginalization process can have, I should say, dangerous backlash. All right. Creating the correct empowerment environment is going to be an important element that we want to pay attention to as well, because that's going to be critical across the board. All right. Anybody has any questions they want to ask about so far? You have pretty understanding everything that we're going through with the empowering and the inclusivity and the process and that type of stuff. Yes? No questions? You all know about this one, the in group and the out group? How many of you all are part of the in crowd as opposed to the out crowd? We call them the out crowd. But the in groups, that's similar to mattering and not mattering. So the in groups are those people who are they make all the important decisions, they get all the important activities. The out group are those people, just give them little to do, or they're not consulted about decision making. And that again has to do with marginalization. So something that leaders have to be careful that you don't create this type of natural cliquing that tends to take place. And that's something that happens a lot in organizations, and natural kind of cliquing that takes place in organizations. Sometimes it's from obvious differences like gender might cause that. Um, you might have disciplines that might cause it. I know sometimes we tend to create that situation within departments. So I don't know how many of you all have ever experienced, or any of you here who work in an HR department and realize that a lot of time HR tends to be treated differently to everybody else. The HR department, the members of the department don't line with everybody else and that kind of stuff. And they're actually encouraged to do that. And I'll tell you why. Because it is believed that what they do at work is so private and confidential that they're not allowed to really have any kind of discussion with people from the general working staff or personnel about that information. Any of you all have experienced that?
Yes, sir.
Right. And that is something that the environment is creating. Understand that? Yeah, and that is what I'm talking about. That in and out group can be something that we are creating by the culture that we have in the organization. And it is important for the leader to contribute to breaking that up or creating a different type of environment, um, to be able to help to build that, because then you're going to have things happening in the organization that are not going to be met by every individual. So you might find that there's a whole set of people in the production area, or the key business areas trying to get something done. But because these people are in a different grouping by themselves, they believe as if they are above and beyond that, and therefore they feel excluded from that activity. They may be doing things there that hinder this behavior over here. So things like that are also that you have to look for, environments that you're creating. That's something that leaders and leadership has to pay attention to. All right. So when you're doing that empowerment activity and creating those environments. So indeed, if the leader retains a great deal of the power for themselves when delegating. So this is talking about delegating without responsibility. Um, and delegation is not the same as empowerment. That's the difference. Leader cannot give tasks to participants to do, no matter how important these assignments may be, and simply assume that participants will subsequently feel empowered. That's not how empowerment works. Empowerment means that you have to give over every aspect of that activity to that individual, or else you run the risk of feeling or generating this type of response. So you have to be careful with that element. Um, These are the things that we want to be looking at. Empowerment is achieved by enabling the involvement of group members and conveying faith in them. So you can't be micromanaging somebody too. That's another element that goes on. You have to be able to hand over and trust that those individuals would would come to you if they have an issue. One, that's the first thing, and two, that they will bring the best thing coming forward. All right. If you're micromanaging, then that will make sense. You have to give a lot of power over to these groups or individuals to be able to get this stuff done. All right, so then now we come to the ethical aspect of leadership, and this is one that we kind of probably go through because this one is going to be dealt with in units chapter 6. The two chapter 6 is both from the DAFT and the exploring leadership. So the relational leadership model emphasizes the ethical and moral leadership, meaning leadership that is driven by values and standards, and leadership that is good or moral in nature. The language you use to examine ethical moral leadership is of the utmost importance. Some have a tendency to use the term ethics and morals interchangeably, but um, often we tend to differentiate between them, yet draw a strong relationship between them. So this is the important stuff. Ethics is the social rules that govern and limit our conduct, especially the ultimate rules considering right and wrong. So that's the ethical values in our society. So, and again, a bit of a definition of what ethics is all about. Ethics comes from the word ethos, which is the word for character and sentiment of the community. Other definitions of ethics includes the principles of conduct governing an individual or professional. So you have standards of behavior. So you call those standards of behavior become protocols that people follow. Anybody knows the concept of the Hippocratic Oath that doctors are supposed to take? Um,
Is that do no harm?
yeah, first do no harm. Yeah. Um, so that's part of the Hippocratic Oath. Some of you might be familiar with the Nursing Pledge, if you've ever heard it. That's another oath. Most organizations and disciplines, professional disciplines, have a code of conduct that they call that say professional groups have a set of ethical standards. I know accountancy has their own ethical values and standards. Um, in fact, they had to review it after the nonsense that took place with Enron and that kind of stuff in the late 90s, early 2000s. They had to fix that fast because people were lost a lot of respect for accountancy. Still have that issue too. Of course, governance, politics, there are no ethical values and standards that are built into it, but there's an expectation that you would look at um, keeping keeping your social standards, or what's the word I want to use? Right? Keeping the society's values close to your behavioral values as well. So there's supposed to be an intercept between the two. That's going to be pretty. So ethical standards, whether they are established by individuals or organizations, guides people's behavior. All right. Ethics will be defined as rules or standards that govern behavior. That's the assumption that's going to be utilized here. So ethical standards, whether they are established by the, oh, sorry, this is the same thing twice. Principles like values, ethics, standards, and morals provide true north directions to our lives when navigating the streams of our environment. That's an interesting quotation. Professions, as we said, often establish their own codes, but the idea is that these values or ethics supposed to provide us with guidance. Problem is in some institutions or some areas of activities, the guidance is not as clear as others. And leadership is one where there are problems with that. If you're in an organization that is, primarily concerned with one particular type of behavior activity, then there's a likelihood that there are some ethical values that you're following or established code of ethics that you're following. But there's some basic stuff that there are very little guidelines that you look at except for what exists in this society. So moral means relating to the principles of right and wrong or arising from one's conscience of a sense of good and evil, pertaining to the discernment of good and evil, instructive of what is good and evil or bad. Morals are commonly thought to be influenced by religion or personal beliefs. Moral leadership is concerned with good leadership, that is, leadership with good means and good ends. So, this is the difference between ethics and morals. Primarily, morals speak to what we perceive to be right and wrong. Now, therein lies a bit of a challenge because if you're those are the assumptions that they're making, but there are problems with morals that vary from one society to the next. So the assumption here in this text is that we're looking at Western values, but there are other value systems that exist that do not. All right. So let me give you an example. You all understand what honor killings are? Western society looks upon that behavior of honor killings as something as absolutely evil. Anybody knows what an honor killing is? Ever heard of it? It's something
Never.
called. Never heard of an honor killing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where a brother or father may kill a sister or parent or mother, sorry, because they have engaged in some sort of behavior that is outside of what is expected in their society. So, for example, if your sister or your mother has engaged in extramarital sex, then you can kill them for the honor of the family. Now, it also,
Does that still go on?
yes, it does. Um, it also goes on with family members who kill um, women who are raped because they still view it as their fault that they got raped. Understand what I'm talking about? So honor killing is an Eastern culture thing, um, and is something that in that culture is deemed as normal and good because what you've done is to protect um, the family's honor. That's what you do. You might have seen similar things in Japanese culture, where things are done for honor in the family or saving face in the family. You understand that concept? Anybody who's into Japanese manga and stuff like that, I come across that particular, and they would engage in seppuku. You understand what that is? Ritual suicide,
Yes, sir.
right? To protect the honor of the family, uh, because they and those things are viewed by Western culture, or what we call Western culture now, as barbaric behavior. So a lot of things that originate out of Asia and the Asian continent and Eastern Asian continent is viewed as being evil and bad, which is why moral values is something that we have to look very carefully at because morals are different based upon the the places that we're born and the religious backgrounds that we come from. That's why they tend to be so interlinked. And this is one of the reasons why we have so much problems because our values that are driven by them can have overlaps, but what we actually believe in will be critically different. All right. So the assumption is we're looking at Western concepts here. Okay. So leadership is a rational and ethical process of people together. So we're coming back to the relational model in an ethics. Using this philosophy, leaders and followers act out of a sense of shared values. So again, shared values means that we are assuming that we are all sharing the same moral values and same ethical values, and we have to understand to use them differently. The actions of leaders and participants emanate from a set of values which we hope are congruent and shared. So it means that it's something that we all collectively believe across the board in all circumstances, and we believe them together. Values are freely chosen personal beliefs or the guiding principles in our lives with respect to the personal and social ends we desire. Simply stated, values are our personal beliefs. So this is different definitions coming from the text about it. Interesting that they would say that it's personal beliefs that we are free to choose. That's an interesting thing. Um, Consider some of the values that you have. Were you free to choose them, or was it imposed upon you? You don't have to answer that now. But you have to think about it. All right. Although there's much disagreement in the literature about whether or not leadership is values neutral or values driven, it's safe to say that most people expect leaders to do the right thing, which means there's the expectation that leaders would be ethical and moral in their behavior. It is important for leaders to be honest, upright, and ethical in the deal. Unfortunately, we've seen That not really happening. Okay, especially when we come to looking at our governance. So as leaders and citizens, our challenge is to look closely between the gaps of, and this course also always causes this, and the gaps between what we expect leaders to do, especially when it comes from ethical behavior, to what is actually taking place. And the challenge of this model is for us to bridge that gap, to create or become leaders that have the capacity and the courage, and as some people say, the testicular fortitude to actually lead in an ethical and moral manner. And that is the challenge of the ethical leadership model. Um, there, sometimes you see a kind of rise in this behavior, and then sometimes you find that it's behavior. For me, it's always been one that I found that anti-vaccine, anti-leadership vaccine is kind of growing a lot. And the idea is that in doing courses like this, might encourage a lot of you all to want to become more critical leaders outside there, who engage in more critical thinking. And even if you're not a leader, but you're a follower, that you will engage with the leadership that exists to become better, and do things the right way, because the leadership, what's the word I want to use, it really, leadership is something that is you can't see it, but it's there. You know when it's there, but it's not something that's tangible, but you can feel it around you when it's happening. um, so these are the takes that they're talking about here. And how do we get individuals into behaving a particular manner? That kind of stuff is what we're going to be paying a lot of attention to in terms of this. Now we are hitting close to half eight. Didn't give you all a break. We still have a couple hundred leading by example. And go to the areas of leading by example and stuff like that. Kind of go through this on your own, look at it. So basically, again, the whole concept is looking at how the leadership exercise takes place, and what's happening and where we go. And then there's some summaries that I started at summarizing at the end, kind of restating things. Let me go to the summaries there. Uh, um, and if you all had a chance to look at these, all right, so summary here, you may acquire leadership skills over time. Using the principles of the relational, you can reframe your skills, involve more people, empower the voices that might have been excluded before, make sure no one is real rooted and that fair decisions are made, involve others in building an agenda and using collaborative practice. Even if do not agree with this approach, you'd feel more comfortable suggesting a different model because of the tone of the group. So these basically summarizing what the chapter was about, and sort of like wishing you all luck with the rest of the course that you can do. So I expect that you guys look at this, the rest of the rest of the lost a lot of people along the way. Um, the rest of the chapter by itself. Did anybody come in? I think that's everybody in and out here. Okay, cool. Any questions on what we looked at so far? Any questions from the group that has to present next week, or groups? The two groups actually.
I'll probably ask you about that after, sir.
Right. So let me stop the recording first, or
That's up to you.
I don't know. is the kind of questions that you're gonna ask will be relevant to everybody. So we have Smith, De Freitas, Raghunanan Singh, and Antoine. I didn't see the Raghunanan Singh make it today. I know Antoine was here earlier. Not seeing them right now. Chris, you and Amy are still here, so I guess we could chat. All right, but I'm going to stop the recording because it might be personal to you. Anybody has any questions? If there are no questions, I'll stop the recording now. Going once, going twice. All right.
No questions. No questions.
All right, Jamal.